The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom was first revealed at E3 2019, known simply as the sequel to Breath of the Wild. The sequel to possibly the most celebrated entry of the entire franchise. Breath of the Wild wasn't just another Zelda game, it came after a seriously long drought of mainline Zelda titles and completely reformed the series formula. Link would finally explore a true open-world Hyrule, and for me, the newest Zelda game felt almost entirely like a reimagining of the very first Zelda game on the NES. In case you didn't know, the first Legend of Zelda was released in 1987 for the Nintendo Entertainment System, or NES for short. At the time, it was revolutionary for allowing players to explore a vast game world, discover a variety of magic items, and slay monsters along the way. The ultimate goal was to restore the Triforce, defeat Ganon, and rescue Princess Zelda. As much as I want to talk about the original Zelda and how Breath of the Wild basically remade that game in the modern day, I would much rather save the topic for a whole different video. The point I'm really trying to make is that Breath of the Wild rewrote the book on Zelda games while staying incredibly faithful to its roots. So, how do you make a Breath of the Wild 2 anyway? I have to be honest, I was extremely skeptical back when the project was revealed. It wasn't easy to imagine, given the scope of the first game. Having an entire Hyrule Kingdom to discover was invigorating, but doing it again seemed a little far-fetched. My most major concern was the fact that Nintendo would be using the exact same open world as before, but supposedly adding more to it. I don't know how the majority of fans felt about this, but I was worried that there just wasn't enough left to explore after multiple playthroughs of Breath of the Wild. Like, it was just difficult to imagine a way to make this version of Hyrule feel new and uncharted. Personally, I chose to avoid learning anything else about the new Zelda game all the way until the release of Mr. Awanuma's gameplay demonstration. Once I saw the new series of mechanics, my optimism shot through the roof. At that point, I could finally imagine how Tears of the Kingdom would succeed Breath of the Wild and become one of the most open-ended sandbox games of the entire franchise. Breath of the Wild is not a perfect game, but it achieves something crucial to justify its open world. Exploration is exciting, and the act of discovery is engaging, which ignites the player's curiosity until eventually, you've carved your very own experience out of this expansive playground. Tears of the Kingdom does all this, but even better in my opinion. There is a nifty new ability called Ultra Hand, and it allows you to manipulate most physical objects in the game in order to solve puzzles, fight enemies, or create almost any abomination you can imagine. Consider Pandora's box officially opened, because the possibilities feel nearly limitless. Obviously, I'm exaggerating, but I'm dead serious when I say that the problem-solving potential in Tears of the Kingdom is incredible. Or you could simply be the person who just uses a rocket jump to skip every puzzle that you come across, which is totally cool and only limited by your access to Zonai devices. The game will typically present a problem and offer a subtle suggestion for solving said problem. The most practical solutions, however, might not always be the most fun or efficient. Using Ultra Hand, most objects in the game can be combined or adhered together and used in clever and intuitive ways. This only gets more interesting when you throw machine objects into the mix called Zonai devices, which have special functions tied to the new battery gauge. You can think of the battery gauge as a stamina bar for the Zonai devices you deploy. I had so much fun experimenting with all the different objects and devices in the game, and I was delighted that so many of the side activities encouraged this experimentation as well. I had a special goal at the outset of the game, which was to experience as much of the optional or sub-activities as I could before focusing on the main quest. I wanted to answer a simple question. How long can I have fun doing whatever I feel like before starting the main quest? While I didn't record any kind of data or metrics, I can attest that I was able to complete dozens of shrines and side activities before I ever felt the need to unlock the map and the paraglider. With my self-imposed limitation, I had to learn unique ways of traveling across Hyrule and finding points of interest without the conventions that I learned from Breath of the Wild. Another new ability in the game is called Ascend, which allows you to essentially warp through a ceiling so that you are standing on top of whatever you just passed through. This was one of my favorite tools because it gave me the excuse to explore every cave I found, knowing I would have a quick and effective exit. I expected to give up on my challenge quickly, but I was able to play tens of hours before the absence of fast travel and gliding became irritating. I'll never forget how exciting it was to finally start the main quest with loads of stamina and equipment that I earned through a silly personal challenge. Falling into one of the chasms, which are new to Hyrule and Tears of the Kingdom, was absolutely breathtaking. My first impression was extremely reserved, and I thought to myself, how neat of them to put these little caves under certain parts of the map. I wonder how many there will be. I can't even describe how mind-blowing it was to learn that there is almost an entire world underneath the familiar Hyrule map. I honestly assumed that it would be sparse and limited like the sky portions of the game, but I was elated to find a whole new dimension to explore and master. The depths are also covered in total darkness, and the only way to explore is by activating light roots. You can also combine consumable items with arrows to launch your own miniature light sources. I've heard stories of some players skipping out on this content to the point of missing the last Sheikah Slate ability, which is shocking to me only because I spent at least half of my playthrough charting the pitch black depths, nearly exploring every inch of it. Throughout the game, I felt constantly reminded of previous Zelda games such as A Link to the Past, specifically the emphasis on switching between realms. We're told and shown that the depths represent the old Hyrule and the ages that came before. It's interesting trying to imagine how the land below relates to the land above in subtle but intriguing ways. Using the Ascend ability, you can sometimes transition all the way from the depths to the surface of Hyrule, which is incredible because it shifts the perspective of exploration. In this game, you will descend and ascend from the beginning until the end. I was intrigued by the Zonai and their mysterious land in the sky, and falling down from the clouds to Hyrule never lost its charm. But I have to admit, I wish that there was more to the sky portions, because at times they would feel like random chunks of land scattered around only to justify a few shrines and optional challenges. I don't have anything negative to say about the content on offer, I just wish that there was more of it. Speaking of content I wish there was more of, Tears of the Kingdom brings back traditional dungeons. I enjoyed the divine beasts in Breath of the Wild, but they were missing a crucial element which made them feel somewhat flat or underwhelming. I think it makes perfect sense to include dungeons for adventure games like Zelda, but the 4 found in Breath of the Wild were too similar to the point that even the bosses you fight within them were nearly identical to one another. Tears of the Kingdom improves on this design by giving each new dungeon an appropriate setting and aesthetic. Something that reminded me of A Link to the Past was how each dungeon concludes with freeing a sage who explains to Link why he should want to defeat Ganon. The problem with these is that every sage basically shows the exact same flashback only from the perspective of the given sage. The narrative reward for completing any of the dungeons is the same for completing all of the dungeons, which is uninspired at best and straight up lazy at worst. It makes no sense to me why none of the sages have anything special or unique to say, which ultimately makes each of them feel pointless. Thankfully, this is only harmful to the story of the game and not its gameplay. On the bright side, your mechanical reward for completing a dungeon is unlocking a brand new ability which is tied to the spirit of one of the new champion characters. When you start a dungeon quest, you are almost always joined by one of the game's secondary protagonists. Each region has a champion, and when you help a champion free their region from evil, they will agree to join you for the rest of your journey. In practice, this means a phantom version of that character will follow Link throughout the open world and even help you fight enemies. The downside is that the AI champions are really dumb and don't help an awful lot at destroying enemies. However, just like I mentioned before, these champions also grant Link a new ability. I think disclosing their abilities is too heavy of a spoiler, but once you have completed each dungeon, you will have so many new capabilities that totally change the way you play the game. In my opinion, this almost completely makes up for the disappointing conclusions found in the cutscenes. I think it's exciting to have actual companion characters in a Zelda game, but they're honestly not that great after the initial honeymoon phase. The greatest feature is earning brand new powers for completing a dungeon, which alter how you play the rest of the game. I'm hoping that this feature is expanded on in Zelda games going forward. I'd rather not talk in the story spoiler territory of this game, mostly because I personally enjoyed the twists and revelations found on offer. I was excited to see familiar characters thrust into all new roles, and I loved that certain conventions of the series were able to change and evolve to give us a very unique and worthy inclusion to the Legend of Zelda universe. Despite being a direct sequel to Breath of the Wild, it actually doesn't pick up where that game left off. It's more like a standalone story in the history of these characters, which I appreciated because it allowed this game to stand on its own feet. You're not required to play Breath of the Wild to understand or enjoy Tears of the Kingdom, which I think is a good design choice. When I completed my over 100-hour playthrough, my first thoughts were literally, I wish I hadn't just finished this game, because I truly hoped it could keep going on and on. It is such a fun and rewarding experience once you've mastered the new mechanics, and my biggest complaint is that this amazing game is locked to an underpowered and outdated console. Pretty much the only disappointing part of this experience for me was the terrible chug of the Nintendo Switch, which was marginally improved with updates over time. The fact is, however, that the Switch is barely capable of handling this game and its features, and I would hate for this to be the most compelling reason for someone to avoid the game. That said, I also think it would be kinda scummy of Nintendo to re-release the game and make people purchase it again to enjoy the same game functioning on better hardware. I recommend this game to anyone that enjoys open worlds and adventure games, or anyone who considers themselves a fan of old and new Zelda games. Going forward, my hope is that future Zelda games build on the best parts of Tears of the Kingdom, like the Ultra Hand ability and the free-form nature of its puzzle solving. Now that I've shared some of my thoughts, I'm curious how everyone else felt about this entry into the Legend of Zelda franchise. In the comments, let me know what you enjoyed the most and least about Tears of the Kingdom, and consider sharing this video with a fellow fan of Zelda games. Anyways, my name is Pinello, and I appreciate you watching my video. See ya!